If you ever wondered why that dream job, perfect partner, or windfall you visualized so intensely either never came or left you feeling empty when it did, well, buckle up. This video is fundamentally gonna change how you understand desire itself and might even help you get unstuck from cycles of craving and disappointment. I'm Andy Christoph, and today's topic is the so-called law of attraction. That incredibly seductive idea that if you just visualize something hard enough, the universe will somehow deliver it straight to your doorstep. And I get it, especially for those of us who feel like we have to keep up with the Joneses, the high functioning on the outside, always striving, always going the extra mile. This idea can feel like a potential lifeline, a way to finally quiet that restlessness inside, that sense of disconnection, that feeling that despite everything you've achieved, something fundamental is missing. But here's the uncomfortable question I want you to really sit with. Has that popular visualize and manifest approach genuinely brought you any lasting satisfaction, or has it led to more striving, more of that familiar sense of emptiness creeping back in? We need to peel back the layers of this shiny concept because that pop culture understanding isn't just overly simplistic. It reflects a profound misunderstanding of human psychology and of how desire actually works. The popular framing treats the universe like some cosmic vending machine. You put in your wish and wait for the product. Notice how absurd this is. You at the center and the universe around you, this benevolent force, a genie in a bottle, ready to make all your dreams come true. The question this begs is, what's the actual impulse behind that sort of magical thinking? It isn't about things per se, it's about something much more fundamental, much more intimate. Your internal relationship to your desires and how that relationship functions as a filter that shapes your very perception of reality. To get at the heart of this, we need to dive into a concept from psychodynamic theory that sounds academic, but is fundamental to understanding ourselves: Cathexis. This term was first introduced by Sigmund Freud in his economic model of the psyche, describing the process of investing libidinal or life force energy into a particular object. But let me be clear about what he means by object. The object in Cathexis isn't just a physical thing like a car, a house, or a brick. As later object relations theorists like Melanie, Klein, and Winnicott developed the concept, an object can be anything: a person, an abstract idea like success or freedom, a career goal, or even your aspirational future self. And here's the absolutely critical part. The cathected object exists not just externally in the world out there, but it also exists as what Melanie Klein called an internal object, which is the internalized representation of that thing or of that significant other that we carry within our psyche. For Klein, these internal objects are initially formed through the infant's attempts to manage anxiety by taking in and organizing experiences with the mother of being cared for, frustrated, satisfied, or threatened. They form emotional imprints and become parts of our internal world, influencing how we perceive and relate to external people and things throughout life. As a quick aside, I want you to notice the tremendous importance and power of these early emotional imprints. They're mostly unconscious and often pre-verbal, and they can profoundly, sometimes irreversibly, shape who we become and what we want later in life. I made a whole video on what are called the 4 life positions, so if you're interested in diving deeper, feel free to check it out. Now, here's where we need to make an important distinction. I'm going to introduce 2 terms that aren't technically established, but I think they capture something crucial that object relations theory points to. Let's call it functional cathexis versus compensatory cathexis. There are 2 frameworks underpinning this distinction. The first is Winnicott's work on environmental provision, which shows that reliable and consistent caregiving is crucial for an infant to develop a stable sense of self. And the second is Melanie Klein's insight about what she calls introjection, the unconscious process of internalizing the thoughts, beliefs, and traits of an object we've emotionally invested in, particularly the mother, and its fundamental role in structuring the psyche itself. Before I highlight why I believe this distinction is important, I want to make it clear that the psychic mechanism of cathexis itself, the investment of libidinal energy in internal objects, operates identically in both cases. The difference lies not in the process, but in the developmental origin and the quality of the internal object relations themselves. So with this in mind, the key difference appears to be this. Functional cathexis involves investment in internal objects that were formed through what Winnicott called good enough environmental provision. This is caregiving where the child's needs were met reliably enough to allow for healthy internalization. The resulting internal objects maintain what Melanie Klein described as whole object qualities. They're stable, integrated representations that support rather than undermine the self's coherence. In contrast, compensatory cathexis involves an emotional investment in internal objects formed through what Winnicott called impingement, developmental context where the child's authentic emotional experience was consistently dismissed, criticized, or overwhelmed by external demands. This leads to disruptions to the self's continuity and cohesiveness. In Melanie Klein's parlance, in such environments, the internal objects become charged with part-object qualities. These are split-off functions or features of the caregiver which the infant experiences as either all good or all bad, either gratifying or frustrating. The all bad part objects become internalized as attacking, critical, or dangerous introjects, while the idealized all good part objects evolve into targets of unconscious fantasies about repair, completion, carrying the promise that if they can be secured or possessed, they'll restore the fundamental sense of safety and wholeness that was disrupted in the early development. Let me try to explain this in more simple terms. Functional cathexis involves investing mental and emotional energy in people, things, or ideas that align with our healthy development and authentic self-expression. Compensatory cathexis, on the other hand, is unconsciously imbuing or endowing such people, things, or ideas with the power to resolve fundamental issues about our worth, safety, or identity. Let's take an example. Think of an actress who finds deep satisfaction in her craft, not for fame, but for the thrill of tuning into her body, exploring various facets of human nature through her characters, and the ongoing challenge of emotional and artistic growth. Now, put this in contrast with compensatory cathexis. Here, the acting career is no longer just a journey of personal evolution and artistic expression. It becomes an obsession with the red carpet moment, which is nothing but a proxy for finally being seen and feeling good enough, for gaining the approval or validation we lacked growing up. Crucially, the person experiencing compensatory cathexis isn't consciously looking for psychic repair. They're pursuing what appears to them to be legitimate and even admirable goals. The actress working on mastering her craft and the actor looking for celebrity status from the outside may both appear equally driven. They're both invested or cathected in their pursuit. But the internal object constellation driving each pursuit has fundamentally different origins and functions. And more importantly, it also has a different flavor, different texture, different feel to it in the body. I'm careful not to oversimplify this and make it seem like a binary either-or distinction. It's useful to think of these not as fixed categories, but as organizing principles that can shift over time and across contexts. The same actress might begin with intrinsic motivation, but slide into compensatory patterns as recognition accumulates or when certain situations trigger insecurities. What matters, and this is the reason I wanted to actually make this distinction to begin with, is to develop the acuity to recognize when the balance starts tipping too far toward compensatory organization. You might want to treat this framework as a dynamic assessment tool, a way of recognizing shifts in how you relate to your goals and the people in your life. The question then becomes not am I functional or compensatory, but rather, what's driving me right now and how sustainable does it feel? So what does the difference between the two actually feel like in your body and your mind? Healthy emotional investment has a quality of spaciousness to it. There's excitement, but also a sense of sustainability. You can imagine not getting the thing and still fundamentally feeling okay. The energy is clean, flowing, connected to something larger than just proving yourself. There's also patience in it, a certain curiosity and a willingness to engage with the process itself rather than just the outcome. To give you an example, I remember when I was learning to play the guitar, I'd really work hard to nail the chord progression of a particular song, and I'd lose track of time. There was no ulterior motive behind it, just the sheer joy of loving music and improving with every new try. On the other hand, when you think of compensatory cathexis, it carries what Klein recognized as persecutory anxiety, an undertone of urgency and desperation, a quality of having to rather than wanting to. There's a tightness in your body, maybe in your chest, your jaw, your stomach, so the energy feels driven, effortful, like you're running towards something to escape something else. So when we intensely desire something through compensatory cathexis, we're investing huge amounts of psychic energy into an internalized symbol loaded with unconscious meanings and unresolved needs. The object becomes a container for hidden desires, maybe for safety we never felt, or for worth that feels elusive, or for redemption from past failures. So when we obsess over that job promotion, that big house, that ideal relationship, we're not just wanting it, we're defining ourselves by its absence, reinforcing a self-structure built on deficiency. We're feeding the engine of anxiety. The desired object becomes this glowing symbol of completeness, and the self becomes the one who lacks it and must therefore continuously strive to bridge the gap. What emerges from this analysis is what Winnicott recognized as the fundamental tension between true and false self-organization. When we're caught in compensatory cathexis, we develop what he called a compliant false self, incredibly skilled at reading other people's demands and meeting them, but at the cost of spontaneous self-expression. People trapped in this pattern often describe feeling like they're performing their life. There is this exhausting split between the public self, competent, successful, appealing, and the private self, uncertain and performing for an invisible audience. As Winnicott noticed, when the false self dominates, you feel hollow, restless, and purposeless, no matter how successful you look on the outside. The more capable you become at getting external validation, the more disconnected you may feel from your authentic core. Moving beyond this dynamic isn't about eliminating desire. Desire itself isn't the problem. It's about what psychoanalysts call working through, the process of gradually metabolizing the unconscious material that drives this compensatory object seeking. It starts with developing a clear awareness of just how much vital psychic energy you've been pouring into external symbols of completion, what Melanie Klein called the process of withdrawing projections, and beginning the patient work of reclaiming that energy for your own development. This withdrawal, this decathexis, is a reclamation, a calling back of the parts of yourself that you've outsourced. And as you explore this with curiosity rather than judgment, you might find that grief starts coming up. Grief for the fantasy you've been chasing, the fantasy that there's something outside that could fix something inside. That grief is necessary for integration. It's the signal that the energy is starting to flow back, that you're collecting all those scattered pieces of yourself, that you're moving from fragmentation towards integration. Instead of chasing the symbol, the fancy title, or the Instagram lifestyle, you focus on cultivating the state that those symbols supposedly represent. If you find yourself craving status through a job, you work on embodying inner confidence and self-worth directly. If you're looking for relationships to escape loneliness, you start cultivating genuine self-love and connection and the capacity for intimacy first. The next step involves what Winnicott called restoring conditions. These are conditions where the true self can start emerging from beneath layers of false self-adaptation. This is not an easy process, by the way, and it often requires a supportive environment, maybe a therapist, and somatic integration, because it's not just about understanding the patterns intellectually and getting insight, but it's about feeling them in the body. Instead of just pushing through, breathe through that sensation, allow it to emerge and observe it as it shifts. Practice simple grounding techniques. Feel your feet on the floor, sense your spine, notice your surroundings, anchor in the present. These aren't just relaxation techniques, they're ways of coming home to yourself, to your body, bringing mind and body back together as a foundation for authentic, embodied living. As we become more integrated and more grounded, something shifts in how we relate to desire itself. When desire is integrated with reality, purified of those old wounds and rooted in embodied self-possession, it starts transforming from grasping into what we might call magnetism, this natural pull that arises from wholeness rather than neediness. Leadership, partnership, creativity, these emerge from authenticity and purpose, not from looking for applause and validation. When you stop organizing your life around perceived lack and start relating from who you already are, inherently worthy, inherently present, your whole energy field changes. You stop chasing and start inviting. You're no longer desperately trying to tune the radio. You become the tuned radio, receiving clear signals naturally. In this state, you don't need to attract anything in some manipulative sense. Things just align. Opportunities, relationships, experiences, they flow naturally and in their own due time. So there you have it, the journey from craving to coherence. We started by challenging that really seductive but ultimately insidious and limiting popular myth, the law of attraction, and we've arrived at something much more substantial. Understanding desire not as a cosmic vending machine, but as a profound psychological reality that shapes how we experience ourselves and our relationships. The key takeaways? Well, desire itself isn't wrong, but it becomes enslaving when we fuse it with compensatory needs rooted in early wounds. The object of desire isn't truly external, it's often a mirror of our internal self-structure, our unconscious attempts to resolve fundamental questions about worth through external acquisition. True fulfillment then starts when we dissolve that split between functional and compensatory cathexis, when we start moving away from the false self and into embodying our true self. When you learn to stand in your own presence, when you're grounded in internal coherence, when you need no external validation for your sense of worth, you become naturally magnetic. This is the real law of attraction. It's not a magic formula for manifesting desires, but a truth about how psychological authenticity creates conditions for true connection, meaningful work, and satisfying, lasting relationships.